The Hashemite family was the only Arab body which cooperated with Britain in the First World War. In return, they sought to re-establish a pan-Arab kingdom throughout the Middle East. Britain dispatched a letter of support, explicitly excluding Christian Lebanon from this kingdom. Reference to Palestine, however, was somewhat ambiguous. The Arabs would claim that it was granted to them, while the British would declare that no such promise was made. This dispute would never have erupted, however, were it not for that other British document, the Balfour Declaration, which promised Palestine to the Jews. June 1918, a British ship carrying supplies of gold and rifles to Emir Faisal also bore a distinguished passenger, Dr. Chaim Weizmann. The Zionist leader sought to reach an understanding with a man who then represented the Arab liberation movement. The desert meeting between the two leaders would subsequently lead to the signing of the Weizmann-Faisal agreement on the Palestine question.
Weizmann would never forget the drama of his experience with Faisal. In later years, whenever the relations between Jews and Arabs became tense and violent, he would say, yes, but back in 1918 it was possible for a Zionist leader and the greatest of Arab leaders to meet together and to reach an agreement. Perhaps what happened once could happen again. Another of his impressions was the apathy of Faisal about Palestine. Faisal was dramatically concerned with Damascus and with Baghdad, the great historic capitals, but this little squalid corner that he called Palestine, he attached very little importance to it.
On September 19, 1918, the war in Palestine flared up. Hundreds of cannons opened a barrage of hellfire on Turkish positions. The main force then broke through the Jezreel Valley at the historic pass of Megiddo, climbing the Nazareth Hills and proceeding through the Golan Heights towards Damascus. At the same time, a task force was sent to occupy Transjordan. It included the Jewish Legion, comprising volunteers from Britain and from the United States who came to fight as Jews in the battle for liberation of the Promised Land. The Jewish Legion was the first to cross the Jordan River, fighting on the same side as the Arabs, but for different political reasons. The immediate Turkish surrender in Transjordan opened the road northward to Syria. This was the finest hour for the Arabs. Faisal and Lawrence rushed to Damascus. Allenby ordered the rest of his troops to halt at the outskirts of the city, allowing the Arabs the privilege of entering Damascus first. Damascus, historic capital of Syria and cradle of modern Arab nationalism, welcomed Faisal enthusiastically. Cries of "Long live Faisal" and "Long live Lawrence," that is Lawrence, could be heard everywhere.
People were happy. Men and women gathered on the rooftops. Faisal passed through the Al-Hamadiyya marketplace, from which the road leads to the Umayyad Mosque. People were pleased, hoping that they would be granted an Arab state, as they were promised before the war broke out. A state to be ruled by Faisal.
News of the establishment of military rule in Damascus, headed by Emir Faisal, made a great impression on the Arabs of Palestine. Suddenly realizing that Syria was about to achieve independence while Palestine was promised to the Jews by the Balfour Declaration, the Arabs awakened and began political activity. They declared that Palestine was an inseparable part of Syria. From then on, they referred to the land as southern Syria, rather than Palestine.
The Arab national feeling in Palestine was part of the Arab national feeling in the rest of the Arab area, Arab Middle East. Yes, Palestine was part of the Asham, or the Asham meaning, the whole of Syria, northern, southern Syria, and so on. You know, this division between Palestine, Syria, Transjordan, Lebanon, and so on came about because France and Britain and Russia at one time, before the Bolshevik resolution, wanted to have spheres of influence. But to us, we at least thought that we were a part of one people and one country, and this is how we wanted it to be.
In November 1918, Germany surrendered to the Allies. The First World War came to an end. Millions received the news with outbursts of joy. The scene now shifted to Paris. The French capital was privileged to host the peace conference. The eyes of the entire world were turned towards this city, which was celebrating victory. The atmosphere was saturated with great hope. The three most important personalities at the peace conference were the leaders of the free democratic world. The British Prime Minister David Lloyd George, the 80-year-old Prime Minister of France, Georges Clemenceau, and the person who was firmly resolved to ensure the right of self-determination for all nations, the President of the United States, Woodrow Wilson. The news spread rapidly. Delegations came to Paris from all over the world, demanding the right of self-determination for their own nations as well. In January 1919, Paris looked like an international carnival of freedom seekers. Among others, one could meet the main characters of the Palestinian drama, the Jewish Liberation Movement delegation, led by Dr. Chaim Weizmann, and that of the Arab Liberation Movement, headed by Emir Faisal. Faisal's appearance in Paris created a sensation. His regal bearing, the aura of the revolt in the desert, and the participation of the legendary Lawrence himself in his delegation all made a great impression on the media. To improve his political standing, Faisal conferred with Weizmann and signed an agreement of cooperation with him, relinquishing his claim to Palestine and consenting that it be granted to the Jews. Faisal did not sign this document wholeheartedly. At the last minute, he added a certain reservation in his own handwriting, namely, on condition that the Arabs gain their independence, else I will not consider myself bound by a single word of this agreement.
I had an extraordinary experience at the peace conference in connection with the Palestine mandate. I was there as the head of the Foreign Office League of Nations section. And it so happened that the head of the Foreign Office section, who was dealing with the Palestine mandate, working very closely with Dr. Weizmann, very devoted to the Zionist cause, was a certain Eric Forbes Adam. And so every day in Paris, in the delegation offices, we used to argue this matter. And day after day, I said to America, it's no good. I just don't believe it can work. I don't believe you can take a lot of people into somebody else's country without creating troubles of every possible description. And Eric Forbes Adam got very exhausted, very tired of listening to me saying this rigmarole, which I constantly repeated. And he said, will you fix a date to lunch with me sometime off so that I can make arrangements that I want to make? Friday week. So I said, all right, Friday week. And when I got to the lunch on Friday week, who were his other guests but Lawrence of Arabia and the Emir of Faisal? And I was converted to Zionism by those two men, Faisal making the speeches and Lawrence of Arabia translating from the Arabic. And the Emir Faisal said to me, of course we want Zionists to come into Palestine. We know what will happen. They'll bring vast sums of American and other capital from abroad. They'll bring in the greatest scientists in the world. All the greatest scientists are Jewish. And the territory of Palestine, now so arid and so much of it a desert, will be transformed. It will become a garden. It will blossom like the rose. We shall borrow their experts. We shall work together. We shall do the same in all the countries which we Arabs have turned into deserts. We shall make them flourish again, as they used to in the past.
And so the Zionist delegation, headed by Chaim Weizmann, Nachum Sokolov, and Menachem Usishkin, appeared at the peace conference with no Arab opposition. In his address, Usishkin claimed that the Jews too are entitled to self-determination. The land of Israel, he said, was forcibly usurped from the Jewish people, who were exiled and dispersed throughout the world. And now I, the descendant of those exiles, come before you and demand that our stolen historic homeland be returned to us. The agreement between Faisal and Weizmann was never put to the test. When the peace conference adjourned, the British made it clear that they were unable to keep their promises to the Arabs because of the strong objection of France, which claimed for itself the mandate over Syria and Lebanon. Faisal returned to Damascus empty-handed. When the news came that the French intended to expel Faisal from Syria, as he was too pro-British for their tastes, his Syrian and Palestinian supporters decided to launch a struggle. Excitement ran high in Jerusalem as well. In 1920, as the Nebi Musa festival procession left the Temple Mount, cries of "Long live King Faisal" and "Death to the Jews" could be heard. Suddenly the Arabs began to attack the Jews.
I'll always remember. It happened on Passover, the festival of Nebi Musa. This was always an enjoyable experience for both tourists and our own families. Their songs, enthusiasm, swords, but swords raised in joy. I never heard of anyone being wounded. Then on that Sunday, suddenly they began to run, brandishing their swords, pointing with their fingers. That hotel is full of Zionists. Zionists have come. They'll take Jerusalem away from us. Aleum.